You all heard that. I started recording the class, just so you know. I'm waiting just a few more seconds for everyone to join us because I'm going to do a roll call once again this morning, simply because a number of students have moved out of the course and been replaced by a number of new students. So I want to welcome everyone to section D15 of English 102 this morning. And once again, just go through my class list in about 30 seconds. There's still people coming in. We're at 23 right now. And just a reminder, I think everyone has their mute on, but when you first come into the class, if you don't mind putting on your mute and then unmuting yourself at any point you might have a question, that saves me from background noise. Great, lots of people coming in still. Okay, we're at 25 right now. I'm just going to get started. As I mentioned, a number of people have moved out of this section and been replaced by some new folks. I want to welcome you all to D15, and I'm going to run through my class list. And would you briefly unmute and just say hello when I call out your name? And once again, correct me if I mispronounce. I hope I won't do that this morning, but just let me know if there's another way you prefer me to pronounce your first name. I'm not too worried about last names, okay? So just make a noise when I call your name if you're here. Lorelei.
Hello.
Hi. Bree Buxton. Not yet with us. Karina Chan.
Hi.
Hi.
Heads, sort of for the first time in the West.
Oh, Abigail, do you mind
About this more later and what happened?
putting on your mute if you don't mind? Thank you. Dave Chatwell.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks, Dave. Kylan Kulane.
Hi.
Kylan, hi. Thank you. Ada Emika Mabachu. Are you here with us this morning, Ada? Okay. Junji Fong.
Hi.
Hi. Did I get that right this morning?
Yeah.
Thank you. Jaden Poodling.
Hi.
Hi, Jaden. Thank you. Andre Gachalian.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you. John Glover. Is John with us this morning? Not yet. Savannah Heskins.
Hi.
Hi, Savannah. Thank you. Eugene Huang.
Here.
Thank you. Fahim Iqbal. Is Fahim here? No? Okay. Chase Johnson.
Hello.
Hi, Chase. Thank you. Aiden Clute.
Here.
Hi, thank you. And Ji Lee.
Hi.
Hi, thanks. Thank you. Brett Liu.
Hello.
Hi, thank you, Brett. Katrina McCallalad. Katrina with us? No? These aren't necessarily in alphabetical order, by the way. I've had to put some new names at the bottom. Abs Mosqueda.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. Do you go by Abs or Abigail?
I go by Abs.
Great, thanks, Abs. Surya Moji.
Here.
Hi, thank you. Morgan Myshak.
Hello.
Hi, thanks, Morgan. Ola Oluwadari. Or Oluwadari.
Hello.
Hello, thank you, Ola. Melia Fung, or Malia Fung, excuse me.
Hi.
Hi, did I get it right the second time, Malia?
Yeah.
Thank you. Rushab Shah.
Hello.
Hi, thank you, Rushab. Stephen Shahata.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. Reet Choker.
Hi.
Hi, Reet, thank you. Kizra Sadiq.
Hello.
Hello, good morning. Eric Silver.
Hello.
Hi, good morning, thank you. Gabrielle Sorez.
Hello.
Hi. Deanna Uzi.
It's actually pronounced Deanne.
Deanne, okay.
Yeah.
That, I think Deanne, thank you for that reminder. Mark Walker.
Hello.
Hi. Maya Weckesser or Weckesser. Maya here? No Maya today. Lisa Wilkinson.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. Emma Wong.
Hi.
Hi. Bishoy Wasaf. Is Bishoy here? New registration. Hamad Khan, also a new registration. Hamad, are you here? No. Izzy Major. Is Izzy with us this morning? Maybe some of these people are registered but not yet able to access. Oh, Kylie Moore Foster. No Kylie. Xenia Posh Nolan. And finally, Sunshine Jang. Okay. All those last names are people who've just registered in the last day or two, so perhaps they're unable to access the class at the moment. Well, so we'll see how that goes. What I wanted to do today, are there any questions, by the way, or any concerns before I plunge into today's class? Okay, do feel free to unmute yourself at any point if you have any questions or concerns. In the meantime, I'm going to do a screen share and just go back into eClass for a moment. Oh, hang on. Let's do this. Okay, so here I am back in eClass. I just wanted to run through this quickly with you to note a couple of changes to the page and to indicate where the first assignment can be found, and just to work our way quickly through the assignment, and we can have further conversations about that either in my office hours this afternoon, which I'm holding from 3 to 4 via that link right there. So anyone who wants to drop in with any questions this afternoon is welcome to do so. But I also wanted you to just make sure that you all know where the close reading assignment is. So here we are this week, and we're going to be returning to Bulwer's story in just a moment, Monos and Domenos. I've put up some notes from my lecture of Monday here for you to access, and I'll be going into these notes with you this morning. I also am going to be referring directly to this link, the 3 types of short story, and I'm going to ask you all to have a look at all of these links here, or as many of them as you can, between now and Friday, when we have our first class on essay structure and fundamentals of the English essay in preparation for your close reading assignment. So do familiarize, these are all brief, these links will take you to short documents that will help you understand what it is I'll be looking for when it comes to basic formatting of your first assignment. And so we'll be going through these documents on Friday. And then there's a lot of resources here for you when we take up poetry next Monday, and we'll be discussing poetry in some detail in our class with reference to these 2 poems that I put on the syllabus, the Elegy and My Last Duchess. Have a look at some of these links here too, if you have a moment. But here is here are the three portals for the close reading exercise. Many of you have perhaps already had a chance to look at these, but I'm just going to go into this a moment and run through it with you. So this is for this section, for D15, this is where you'll find the close reading exercise guidelines, topics, and the submission portal, which is restricted to our group. The other two groups have their own submission portal, so you will not be able to submit in those. Make sure you submit to the proper portal. This is what you'll find when you click on here. Okay, here's the close reading assignment itself. It's a PDF. You are not able to submit quite yet because the portal doesn't open until next Friday, but I just wanted to run through the exercise with you. So if you click on it, it comes up as a PDF, and this should work. Okay, everyone can see this? Yeah, okay. Thumbs up, use your icons if you want to let me know that I'm getting through to all of you. So the close reading exercise is due on Monday, the 31st of January, which is a week from next Monday. It's a short assignment we're looking for, 3 to 4 double-spaced pages in 12-point font. Think of 3 pages as an ideal length and 4 if necessary, okay? So I'm looking for a close reading that is a fairly brief and tightly structured argument about a text. This assignment asks you to carry out a close reading in proper essay format of a passage or passages in one of the 3 texts that we will have read by the 31st of January. The short story that we're dealing with once again today, the Gray's poem, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, or Browning's poem, My Last Duchess, and answer one of the following 9 questions. I've given you 3 questions on each text so that you have a good deal of selection. I run through what we're looking for in a close reading here, and want to emphasize that you should read the 2 close reading documents that are up on eClass that give you some hints of what a close reading does. Both of those documents tell you to focus in particular on the language of the passage that you select. Read through those documents, read through these instructions, and if you have any concerns or questions, bring them to me either in my office hours this afternoon or in our class on Friday. So familiarize yourself with the assignment and start thinking about ways of getting started on it. I give you 3 examples here, and these are my own language. I don't want to see you repeat these verbatim in your own assignments, but how to set up the passage, how to indicate what passage you're dealing with. I don't want you to quote the entire passage in the body of your essay. I want you to indicate what the passage is in a more subtle way by introducing the passage and where it is in the text. And I give you 3 possible examples here. The first from Gray's poem. Thomas Gray postpones introducing the lowly but admirable subjects of his elegy written in a country churchyard, the long buried rude forefathers of the hamlet, whose moldering graves the speaker contemplates at the close of day, until line 16 of the poem, suggesting that the opening 4 descriptive quatrains, don't worry, if you don't know what a quatrain is, you will by the end of next Monday's lecture, the focus of my close reading are essential to establishing the poem's deeply melancholy tone. Here's what makes this a successful introduction of a passage. It tells me which text you're dealing with, the elegy, right? It tells me who the author of that text is, Thomas Gray. It identifies the topic of your argument, the long buried rude forefathers, and it tells me that you're going to be looking at a passage that starts at line 16 of the poem. And then you're going to say, and you also tell me then specifically what passage you're dealing with, the first 4 stanzas or quatrains of the poem, and say that's the focus of my close reading. So this is one example of how to introduce the passage that will be the topic of your close reading investigation. I give you two others here in which I do exactly the same thing. I identify the author, the text, and the specific passage that I'm going to deal with, okay? The first page of Edward Bulwer Lytton's story, the opening paragraphs, and here in an essay that says it's going to deal with Browning's My Last Duchess, focusing on those passages where the Duke brags about his art collection. And once again, introducing the topic that the Duke's interest in art says something about his possessiveness over his last Duchess. So use these as examples of ways of introducing your passage, okay? And then here are the actual topics. If you choose to do a topic that's not here because you have an idea that's not covered by one of these topics, you are welcome to pursue your own passage and your own idea. Please just let me know very briefly, either in an email or in a quick meeting with me during my office hours, what your topic is so that I can approve it and tell you whether or not I think you're on the right path. But there are 3 topics here on Gray's Elegy, which is, as you know, a poem we take up next Monday. 3 possible topics on Browning's My Last Duchess, the other poem we take up next Monday, and then 3 topics on the short story that you've already read, Monos and Domenos. And once again, indicating which passages in particular you might focus on as you address that text. Is this good? Everyone knows where now to find this. Read through the instructions carefully, reread them, select your topic based on your interest, more than on some sense that one topic is easier than another, because none of them are particularly easy. And do bring any questions or concerns you might have to me about these topics at any point between now and their due date. One point on late submissions: if you do require an extra day or 2 for submission of this assignment, that is not a problem. What you need to do, however, is simply let me know before the assignment is due, so sometime next week, that you really need a little bit of extra time because of whatever pressures you're under in your lives as students taking other courses and working from home. Just let me know that you need a little bit of extra time, how much extra time you need, and I will be happy to take late assignments, although not too late. An extra day or 2 at most, I'm hoping some of you might need in order to address the assignment as well as you would like to. Also a reminder that this first assignment is one that you get an opportunity to rewrite. This first assignment is only worth 10% of your term grade. Your rewrite will be worth 20%. So there's lots of opportunity to improve based on the comments I provide you on the assignment. And my hope is that all of you will be able to get your initial grade up a bit on your resubmission based on a careful rewrite that addresses my concerns in your original assignment. So in terms of extensions, if you need a little bit of extra time, let me know, but you will probably then have to submit as an attachment to an email, because the web portal will close on Monday the 31st at 5 in the afternoon. So you have to submit your assignment as a Word document attached to an email. Does that all sound reasonably good to everyone? Okay. Just a reminder for those of you who came late, I just see that I have office hours this afternoon that you can drop into and ask me any questions about the course, and I'm happy to review what I'm discussing today. Good. Okay, let's get back to Bulwer's short story. I'm going to do a screen share again because I want to, well, I'll screen share in just a moment. I'm not going to do that right now. Okay. I wanted to complete my synopsis of what happens in the story. And I want to just go back and remind you of what I'm going to call my thesis about this short story. That this short story is not so much about plot, that is about what happens, about events in particular sequences, although things do happen in the story. It's not a story about what happens, so that I suggested on Monday that asking what happens in the story might not be the best question to put to the story, but the best question to put to the story is, what effect does it have on the reader? What kind of emotional impact does it have on you? Or does it try to have on you? Perhaps it's no longer successful in instilling a sense of terror or horror in today's reader, but that's what the story is all about. I just wanted to go back and conclude my remarks on what happens in the story. Okay, I got through 3 points. In my lecture on Monday, and it's going to conclude those points. What happens in the story? The first person narrator opens by telling us a little bit about his background, his education, where he was raised. Then the we learn that the narrator's father dies when he's at the tender age of 18. So he's essentially an orphan in the world who has to make his own way. And I suggested that the fact that he's an orphan, that he has no family, means he needs to kind of construct himself. That in fact, orphanhood presents him with an opportunity to make himself in this world. Okay, he goes to London and then he escapes London for Africa, and he spends an indeterminate amount of time, a number of seasons in Africa, which I suggested represents a certain state of untamed nature. And of course, it also represents solitude or aloneness, which is the narrator's chief craving. He longs to be alone. And so his curse, of course, and this is where I left off on Monday, his curse is to be trailed by this unnamed and very strange antagonist who will not leave him alone. But this antagonist, and I know a number of you had questions about my interpretation. I suggested that you can read this antagonist, this idle and curious being, as he's called, with a pervading, irritating, offensive tissue of little and low thoughts, my favorite sentence in the English language, that antagonist might represent something other than a simple other character in the story, that antagonist might be read, although we don't have to read him this way, as a kind of element of the narrator's self that the narrator comes to despise, that antagonist interrupts the narrator's fundamental desire to be alone, but that antagonist is the only other figure in the story who doesn't find the narrator himself cold and off-putting and impossible to be with. I want to think a little bit more about that, but I first want to finish what I was talking about on Monday, about what actually happens in the story. We broke off our conversation on Monday at the point when the narrator flees the sinking ship. All of the other 350 passengers on the ship drown. So it's a great tragedy, but that's almost a footnote to the story. Somehow, miraculously, the narrator manages to swim to shore, and he wakes up on this desert island, which is like a version of paradise. It's like going back to the Garden of Eden in the Old Testament in the Bible. So the narrator swims to shore, the 350 passengers, the other souls on the ship are all lost, and he finds himself on this small island. It's a literal paradise with, and I quote, streams of silver, trees bending with golden and purple fruits. This is yet another instance of nature after the rock in the opening paragraphs on which the narrator grows up, and Africa, where he spends some time in the middle of the story. So I would suggest that the island is yet another Never Never Land, okay? Another representation of abundant nature. Here's a question I want to put to you, and it's not one that can be answered today, but I just want you to think about this. The narrator somehow has no trouble killing deer and goats for food. How does he do it? Does he have a gun with him? Did he swim to shore with a gun and ammunition? How does he trap them? How does he butcher them? Does he have a knife? What kind of, are these relevant questions to the story? How does he survive on this desert island? It's the same question I asked about his survival in Africa. Once again, the story doesn't tell us. Those questions might be irrelevant to the way that we are supposed to read this story, which is as a kind of myth about human beings going back to nature and becoming primitive once again. Okay, so the island itself is a kind of prelapsarian paradise, the Garden of Eden before the fall, for those of you familiar with the biblical story. The island readily offers up its delicacies for human consumption, just as the Garden of Eden did in the story of Adam and Eve. They didn't have to work for a living, they simply plucked the fruit from the trees, okay? Nature offers itself up to humanity for consumption. So it's kind of a rewriting of the story of the Garden of Eden. Unfortunately for the narrator, of course, his antagonist, this unnamed man, also makes it onto the island. The man he calls his despicable persecutor. So the narrator is persecuted by this man who will not leave him alone. So the despicable persecutor also makes it to the island and literally embraces the narrator and says, "We shall be together still." Note that the antagonist, I'll call him, rarely speaks, and when he does speak, he only says, "We'll be together forever." Okay, there is no escaping this man. Even after the narrator attempts to entomb him in a cave, to murder him by locking him in a cave, he finds a hole to escape the cave. And then, of course, the narrator, as you know, makes this one-sided deal with the man to split the island into two mini kingdoms. You stay on that side of the river, I'll stay on this side of the river, okay? And then the narrator literally becomes the man's servant. He supplies him with food, he carries him across a stream, and so on. Okay, so they're stuck on an island. The fifth of the sixth plot events in the story, the narrator murders the man who refuses to stay on his side of the island. The question is this story then, in that sense, a replay of the story of Cain and Abel in the Garden of Eden? Remember the story of Cain and Abel? Cain murders his younger brother in the book of Genesis, in the biblical story, the first murder, according to the story of creation told in the Bible. This seems to be a sort of similar story. Two men by themselves on an island, one murders the other. And of course, as you know, as soon as the murder is accomplished and the body is buried, the narrator is suddenly filled with intense regret and a sense of his own criminality. As he says, "I am alone at last." And then the sense of loneliness, the vague, vast, comfortless, objectless sense of desolation passed into me. He suddenly realizes that he's truly alone in this world, what he's always longed for, and he's suddenly terrified by that fact. But that's not where the story ends. It's not a story of regret for having murdered this man, because the man comes back. In fact, the very night that the narrator murders the man, his face returns to him. His spirit sits on the end of the man's bed in the cave. And I quote from the story, there's this use of archaic language. We might almost call this biblical language, which suggests that the story that's being told here might be read as a retelling of an ancient myth, the myth of the first murder, the myth of the story of the Garden of Eden. And I quote from the story, at board, at bed, at home and abroad, in my uprising and my downsitting, by day and at night, was this ghastly and dead thing. This spirit haunts him and you cannot get rid of it. The story concludes by the narrator. He's rescued by a passing ship, but the man's spirit, the dead man's spirit, his face, the specter of the dead man, follows him onto the ship, follows him all the way to England, and there is no help for this curse. And the final striking image of the story, which I think is supposed to shock the reader into a certain realization, okay? The final striking image, the man's footprints appear in the sand that the narrator covers his bedroom with. And when the narrator bursts out in fierce agony with the question, and must I never be alone again? He sees the feet of the dead thing trace one word upon the sand. And the word was never, capitalized exclamation mark. That's how the story ends. Okay. So just to reiterate my point, very little actually happens in the story. It's not a story about plot. It's about something else. To describe what happens in the story is to miss the point, I think, which has more to do with its intended effect on the reader. It seeks to do something to you as a reader, to stimulate an emotional response of some kind. It's a tale about feeling and aura, okay, and sensation, more than it is a story about happenings or doings. So how are we supposed to interpret this story? You know from the explanatory notes that I've included with the story in E-Class that Edgar Allan Poe offers us one way of thinking about this story. And I want to look at what Poe says about it. So I'm going to do a screen share with you. And this is in my notes. Oh, excuse me. In E-Class. This is a rather odd way of thinking about the story, but I want to think a little bit about what Poe has to say about the story as one way of carrying out a kind of critical reading of it. Okay, so in the explanatory notes that are included in the Oxford World Classics edition of the story at the back, in which I've provided you on the E-Class, here's what Poe says Edward Bulwer does in this story. The story displays, and I quote, and I've highlighted these words because I want to get a grasp on what they might mean and what Poe is trying to argue here. Poe says that this story displays, and I quote, the ludicrous heightened into the grotesque, the fearful colored into the horrible, the witty exaggerated into the burlesque, the singular wrought out into the strange and mystical. Poe says this is a wonderful story because it does these things. But what's he actually saying here? I would say that what Poe is saying is that Bulwer's story creates a series of emotional and psychological, what we might call elevations or intensifications or amplifications. Poe is saying that the story is a success because it converts these lower level aesthetic categories, the ludicrous and the fearful and the witty, into higher level or superior categories. The ludicrous becomes the grotesque, the merely fearful becomes the horrible, the simply witty becomes the burlesque, and the singular becomes the strange and the mystical. What is Poe saying? I went to my dictionary and constructed this chart to help me understand what it is Poe says Bulwer does in Monos and Domenos. He does these things. He elevates the ludicrous, which is simply that which is unreasonable or foolish and simply amusing and ridiculous, into the grotesque. The grotesque is the human figure represented in an exaggerated and distorted form. One could say that this entire story is exaggerated and distorted. It's not realistic. That's not what the story is about. The story is about something rather different. So it takes the simply amusing and ridiculous and exaggerates and distorts it, exploiting similarities between people and animals and things. So it's an extravagant, whimsical, and preposterous story. That's all it really is, okay? So the ludicrous becomes the grotesque in the story, according to Poe. The fearful becomes the horrible. It's a horror story. It's like a horror film. It's intended to have a certain effect on the reader. So the fearful, that which causes fear or anxiety, becomes, in this story, the horrible, that which horrifies, shocks, or perhaps even disgusts you as a reader. Think about horror as a distinctive genre, the horror film. We've all seen examples of the horror film. What does the horror film attempt to do to the viewer through intensity and through suspense? What kind of subgenre is the horror film? What kind of subgenre is the horror story? So the fearful is elevated or intensified into the horrible. The witty is intensified or elevated in the story into the burlesque, which is a rather strange word that had a different meaning in Bulwer's time than it does today. The witty is simply the lively, the clever, or the quick, the conversationalist or the writer who's capable of being clever, quick, or lively, into the burlesque, which is a form of parody. Parody is the mimicking, the subversive mimicking of an original text to highlight its weaknesses and pretensions. One way of thinking about Monos and Domenos as a parody is that it parodies. So what story does it parody is the question that's raised here. Maybe one of the stories it parodies or mimics in order to reveal its weaknesses and pretensions is the story of creation as told in the Bible, the story of paradise and paradise lost, which is what happens on the island in the last third of Bulwer's story. Okay, so a low subject treated incongruously in an old high style, a spoof. Poe argues that what Bulwer is doing is burlesquing certain written conventions. So once again, elevating the witty into the burlesque. Don't worry too much about whether or not this makes sense to you. Okay, what I'm trying to do here is do a critical reading of Edgar Allan Poe's thesis about what happens in Bulwer's fiction as one way of understanding Bulwer's fiction, but only as one way. Finally, Poe argues that Bulwer turns the singular into the strange and mystical. What might that mean? What does singular mean? Sole, distinctive, itself alone, not representative or exemplary of something beyond itself. So the singular into something strange and mystical, the mystical. This is a story that needs to be read as one that attempts to mystify and to become mystical. So it's representative of a more complex and capacious category than the singular. We might think about the story as attempting some kind of transcendence, something supernatural, something spiritual. My overall assessment of Poe's comment here is that he's trying to get at what it is that Bulwer is trying to do in the story by way of terrifying the reader into a realization of something. What that something is, we'll get at in a little bit more detail in just a couple of minutes. Now, the other two quotations in the explanatory note are as follows. Poe says that Bulwer, in Bulwer's story, all is richly and glowing intellectual. All is energetic or astute or brilliant or profound. I'm just going to leave this with you, but what does it mean to say that Monos and Domenos is an intellectual story? Is it playing with certain intellectual ideas and seeing where it can take them? Is it kind of an intellectual exploration of the human psyche? Poe seems to have thought it was. And then Bulwer himself said this about his own story. And I'm going to, this is going to lead into next Monday's lecture. Bulwer says that this story that he wrote, Monos and Domenos, belongs to the poetical more than to logical philosophy. It utters in prose what are the ordinary didactics of poetry. Don't worry about this language, but I just want you to think about what it means to say that for Bulwer to say that he was trying to write a story that is closer to poetry than it is to prose. It's a poetic short story. He's trying to achieve something that prose is unable to achieve. So it's a short story that he wants us to read almost as being poetic. I'm not going to go through these notes today. I'm going to be putting these up in the lecture next Monday, but we do want to have some sense of what the generic distinctions are between poetry and prose. We're going to be approaching two works of poetry next Monday, and I want to think about poetry as a form that is fundamentally distinct from prose. And I just want to remind us all next Monday what some of those distinctions are, what some of the arguments have been made about what poetry is in distinction from prose. So I'll get to this on Monday. I'm going to turn off this document and approach the story through another text that I put up on eClass. This is from the Coma Press. I put up two short documents on Coma Press that describe the short story. When we're thinking about Bulwer's, excuse me, his name was changed later in life to Bulwer-Lytton. That's why. So Edward Bulwer's short story. What is a short story? That is something we want to grapple with. What are the fundamental elements of the short story? According to Coma Press, these are my, and I'll put these notes up on eClass after today's class. In the short story, the protagonist, who's not necessarily the hero of the story, the protagonist is simply the leading character, the main character of a story. The protagonist does not need to be fleshed out or become three-dimensional, or in more popular terminology, backstory. We learn very little about the backstory, the biography of the first person narrator. All we know is that he was influenced by his father in terms of his youthful education, and that he was also educated by nature in a certain way. That's all we really come to learn about him. We don't know anything about his pre-existence, okay? Unlike the novel, which fleshes out characters, short stories are not about character. They don't develop or they do not focus on the development of character, which is one of the ways, excuse me. Sorry about that. The short story is not then in the way a novel is about character development. In fact, the main character of a short story can remain largely anonymous. And certainly the first person narrator of Bulwer's story is anonymous. He's never named, and we get very little information about him aside from what he's willing to share with us. For those of you who decide to write on the narrator in your close reading assignment, one of the questions there is the narrator a sympathetic character? Can he be read sympathetically, despite the fact that he's a murderer? requires you to look at what he says about himself and what his attitudes towards other people are, and whether or not his actions are justified. Would you murder someone like this figure who interrupts his solitude? Can you put yourself in his position? Is what that question is fundamentally asking you. Given that we know so little about the narrator, that requires a certain kind of sleuth work, seeing what he says about himself and his attitudes towards others. Okay. The second fundamental element of the short story, according to Comma Press, once again, this is in E-class, one of the links in E-class, the short story's truth, and I put that in quotation marks because I'm not completely comfortable with that language, is momentary and fleeting. Short stories can be morally ambiguous. There's a good deal of uncertainty about the moral universe or world that is created in a short story. And certainly Bulwer's short story is indicative of this observation. The morals, the ethics by which the narrator lives are fundamentally different from those by which we live in the real world. So it's an ambiguous moral universe. Maybe the narrator's murder of his antagonist is morally justifiable in the world that is created in that short story. It's certainly, the murder is certainly required along plot lines, right? Because the murder gives rise to the curse. Okay, just as it does in the biblical story of Cain and Abel, sin gives rise to a curse, okay? Cain is literally cursed by God in the biblical story. There's a mark put upon him and he has to go into exile, okay? And then finally, there are three kinds of short story according to the Comma Press link that I provided in E-class. And I'm just going to quickly run through these and suggest that this is the kind of short story that we have encountered with Bulwer's text. The epical. I'm not quite sure what that word means exactly. The epical, something to do with epic. This is the realist short story that withholds part of the narrative. It has a mystery somewhere at the center that needs to be revealed towards the end of the story, and that has certain effects on the reader. So the epical short story is a short story that withholds part of the narrative. There's a hidden or a suspended element, and then introduces that hidden element in an unexpected and surprising way. The very last word of Bulwer's short story might be that revelation. Can I never find peace and solitude and aloneness? And then the foot of the invisible ghost, because it's a ghost story in some ways, traces in the sand, never. Okay, that's the moment of revelation. You can never be left alone. I am your curse. According to the document, the Comma Press document, the revelation can take any number of forms. Guilt is apportioned, an identity is revealed, a secret act is uncovered, etc., etc., etc. In some way, the reader is shocked or jilted by the revelation, and the short story is all about the revelation of that hidden element. The quality of the final revelation aspires toward that of an unexpected discovery. Ask yourself what the unexpected discovery of Monos and Domenos is. It is that there is no escape from that which you most long to escape from. Okay, that's the curse perhaps of human existence. Okay, so I think Bulwer's short story is fundamentally epical. I have to break here for today because we're out of time, but there are two other kinds of short story, the lyrical and the artifice. The open-ended story focusing on a recurrent image or symbol, and then the artifice in which there are contradictory or incompatible ingredients or storylines in a short story. According to Comma Press, these are the three foundational types of short story. These might help you slightly better understand what subgenre, that is, what kind of short story. If the short story is the genre, these are the subgenres of the short story, the subtypes or the subforms that the short story might take. Which of these three kinds is monos and dimenos? Okay, we have to break there for today. Thank you all. I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to turn off my recording. Just a note, by the way, that I think I mentioned this last week, but Zoom does allow me to see who's participated in our meetings, so I can take regular attendance from that. But I will also, on occasion in future, call out your name just so I know you're all still here with me. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll see you on Friday, if not this afternoon in my office hours. Bye.